Nobuo Uematsu is known for his amazingly complex yet melodic pieces composed for the Final Fantasy series, and Final Fantasy XIV's newest theme song for their upcoming expansion, Stormblood, is no exception. Welcome all to my first musical analysis video, where I'll be digging into the composition and imagery from the aforementioned piece, Revolutions. To begin with, I'd like to premise by saying that due to copyright restrictions, I won't be able to use the original track for this video, but rather I'll be using a transcription by Niam Rose from the Odin server. You can check out both of these videos in the links below or at the end of this video. Thank you so much to Niam for providing this terrific work to the Final Fantasy community. I'd also like to say that I will generally be drawing examples and comparisons to a lot of classical music, simply because this is what I like to listen to and it resonates most with me. But in no way is it the only angle to interpret the music. If you find something that you can relate to more or want to mention, leave me a comment. I'd be very interested in broadening my understanding of the music as well. To begin with, I'd like to start by talking about the key that the song is written in, which I believe is C minor, as my teacher always taught me that it was usually hinted by the last note that you heard in the piece. So this key consists of C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, and then finishes with C to complete the octave. It's quite a pretty pattern when you look at it, with the 3 flats in there. Now C minor is a relative key to E flat major, that is to say it uses more or less the same notes. Interestingly though, E flat major is known for being the key that represents a strong, piercing, triumphant, majestic and victorious themes. So it makes sense that the C minor key mirrors that by presenting us with sounds that are more dramatic, storming, languishing, resisting and distressing. When looking more into these moods and imagery for the 2 keys, the word that stuck out in the common between the 2, for me, was heroic. Now, doesn't that set up a beautiful foundation for the piece written by Uematsu that deals with themes of struggle, war and bravery? Let's look at some other well-known examples that can show us just what kind of music we're comparing this to. For example, the Tchaikovsky 1812 Overture, written in E flat major. This piece has its own melodies that stem from revolution and war. How about this segment from Sibelius' 5th Symphony, which while slower and less oppressive, has a lingering sense of yearning and swelling notes that clash together. So are you able to hear some common elements? I chose these pieces for a common purpose. Notice the brass sections in particular, and the way that the notes are made to swell in the accents of the music, particularly in the Sibelius section. Now both of these pieces in their entirety have grandeur notions of heroic callings and strife. Moving on however, let's listen to a couple of pieces in the home key C minor for comparison. Pay close attention to how the feeling of the music changes from an upbeat and powerful to a more sorrowful and dramatic nature. That was from a movement from Beethoven's 3rd Symphony. Beethoven was known for his phenomenal usage of the C minor key, and there are a myriad of pieces that you can draw on for something heavier and more dramatic. This short section uses the same heavy swelling brass sections coupled with strings to create a dark, stagnant tone. which later in the piece contrasts with other instruments trying to break free from it. But for now, let's look at something a little closer to home with the theme of revolution, and Chopin's very own Revolutionary Etude, which was literally inspired by Beethoven's music and written as an outpour of emotion after the Polish Revolution's failure against the Russians. The tone of oppression is fairly heavy in the piano there, isn't it? To me, the whole piece sounds as though a voice or character is trying to break free from the turmoil around it, represented by the chaotic bass. Right, so now that we've spent some time listening to those little bits and pieces, let me start looking at how this works alongside revolutions. The opening for the piece clearly introduces a military tempo with the percussion and the piano, and that's hidden beneath longer notes that are played on the strings. Not long after, we hear 4 notes from the horn. Very indicative of what's to come in the music. And also a great symbol that deliberately is placed there to remind us of a war horn. This is not dissimilar to what classical music has done in the past, namely Mahler and Sibelius come to mind. The notes are also rising, further symbolizing that the call to war is something that is beginning, that is rising with the growing cause, a very revolutionary concept. Susan Calloway, the singer for the piece, enters with the first introduction melody. The first bar of this melody opens with G, reaches up to A flat, and then falls to F. The pattern is repeated again, starting from F and falling to E flat. I will interpret the piece starting in G rather than C, a subtle hint from Uematsu as to what notes he wants to highlight for the listener, and to accustom us to the relation between C and G. And the relation between these two notes is known as a perfect fifth, which to me denotes the concept of a war horn. I apologize that this is a lot of technical wording and stuff, but the main idea for the opening is the falling nature of the notes. They give the piece form and they give it the mood of something trying to rise up, but ultimately being pulled down by a greater weight. Notice also at this point that the horns are playing longer notes alongside the orchestra, also at times highlighting the C and the G notes. Again, the next vocal bars we hear sing 2 notes. No prize on guessing what they are, C and G. They play twice before the vocal melody opens up, attempts to rise up, and quietens down. The violins also change their tempo and style in this section. I don't quite remember what the technique is called, I think it's staccato, but the general feel we get from them is one that echoes the drum beat and rhythm of the piece, with a consistent knocking and a build-up to momentum. In the first iteration of this melody, the orchestra remains fairly quiet, with naught but the brass really taking control of the mood and the feel. The second time, however, a single horn comes in, being the voice of resistance, calling through the vocal notes to the orchestra. We hear it rousing a response, which is now more observable in the woodwind and the string section than the last iteration. This time also the melody ends on the G as opposed to the D that is previously dropped down to, perhaps symbolic of something standing up to an oppressive force. Now I know I'm throwing a lot of assumptions and interpretations, and I want to reaffirm that these are my own observations and thoughts, so you may not necessarily agree or hear what I hear, and that's perfectly fine. The next section that we hear is crucial to the climax of the piece. For me, it comes down to the note of G being an anchor. The passage really dances between G, E flat, and B flat in a sort of struggle, and this relation between these notes, especially G and B flat, is echoed by the horn sections, before collapsing and ending on a D. At this point the melody changes. This time we hear short segments where the notes manage to push back a little, starting with C, The vocal notes play a little trill that conclusively ends on a higher note than what we started on, and eventually returns to the F, which leaves us ready to jump back to G in the repeating section that follows. However, I want to pause here and bring up a comparison to one of Uematsu's earlier pieces, which for me encompasses the anthem-like heroic style that Uematsu adds to music, because we haven't really talked much about his style yet. So let's have a listen and see how you compare these two in terms of instrument, key signatures, and melodies. So, written in a similar key, that was Cid's theme from Final Fantasy VII. I won't talk about it much because I know that could turn into its own analysis, but let's move on and see how familiar the next section feels. Again, we hear that struggle that I was talking about before, fully supported by the orchestra this time. Nobuo Uematsu develops a section with a different ending, so we actually hear notes rising to the climatic note of C played an octave higher at the end there. It's almost encompassing of the release from the struggle and a conclusion that signifies freedom for the music itself. At this point, Uematsu does what any typical composer would do and gives a contrasting melody and a completely different section to refresh us and add a new dynamic to the song. This section is very reminiscent of Nobuo's earlier works, such as Love Will Grow, Melodies of Life, or Diamond in My Heart, which are all themes related to the Final Fantasy series. I'm going to play a few excerpts of these real quickly, just for comparison, and show you how similarly Uematsu introduces these contrasting sections. So you can hear in those pieces that the percussion is sort of cut back and the piano becomes sort of a foreground instrument. Similarly, in Revolutions, the orchestra is sort of stripped away and it's playing more of a piano dynamic, which we can hear only clearly the harps, the bells, and the strings. Now the harps are very symbolic to Uematsu, being the instrument envisioned for Final Fantasy and its prelude many years ago. The bells change the pace of the rhythm as well, giving us a more waltz-like 1-2-3 pace. The melody itself is simple and almost like a lullaby, very flowery because of its shape and how it dances around the notes. And the second repetition that comes in adds a very slight yet powerful change, and that's the woodwind. Together with the strings, they play in harmony, which sounds very free and unbound. It culminates to an end where they are interrupted again by the military march and the percussion and a very imposing horns, heralding a return to the main theme and the concept of the piece. So from this point on, there's nothing really new in the music. The next section are developments of the previous melodies we've already heard, but Uematsu changes the orchestral harmonies to create a very different sound. Firstly, because of that short interlude that we just heard, the orchestra sounds a lot more powerful, with stronger timpani and percussion, added woodwind flares, and the full weight of the string section. Once again, the apex blasts. However, before it fades like it did before, we hear it flare up again, with the vocals, the for your Matsu closes with the classic horn and percussion finisher. And that's all I really want to say about the piece at the moment. You know, it's pretty difficult to dissect every tiny little thing without having proper sheet music and kind of going off ear. But, you know, hopefully you've learnt something from this analysis. It's kind of, I kind of like just doing this sort of thing for myself, just to see how my knowledge with music goes. But if you enjoyed it, you know, let me know in the comments. If you want to see more of these videos, which I probably will be doing come Stormblood, which is releasing tomorrow, let me know. I would love to get your feedback on everything that I've said here today. So yeah, thank you for watching, and until next time, this is Opus 1, signing off.